Jack Mercer hadn't held a child in 12 years. Not since they lowered 2 small caskets into the Arizona dirt and told him to be strong. He had not been strong. He had been nothing. But at 11:47 on a July night in 1997, with thunder cracking across the desert and rain driving hard against his porch, a 10-year-old boy pressed a newborn baby into his arms and looked up at him with eyes that had already seen too much of the world, and said 4 words that shattered every wall Jack had spent a decade building around himself. Please, she's getting cold. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end. Drop a comment below and tell us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The storm had been building since late afternoon. Jack had watched it come the way he watched everything these days, from a distance, through the kitchen window, hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had gone cold an hour ago. He watched the sky turn the color of a bruise over the Sonoran Desert, watched the dust devils spin out past the highway, watched the creosote bushes bend sideways in the first gusts of wind. He watched all of it, the way a man watches a television program, in a language he no longer understands. Present, but not there. Breathing, but not living. Red Hollow, Arizona had a population of 612 people, and Jack Mercer was the one most of them had quietly stopped worrying about. 12 years of silence will do that. 12 years of turned-down dinner invitations, and unanswered phone calls, and a porch light that never came on anymore. The town had grieved with him once. Then the town had moved on the way towns do. And Jack had stayed exactly where the grief left him. The garage sat attached to the east side of the house, and it still smelled like engine grease and summer heat, even in a storm like this one. Jack had built the business with his wife Margaret. They'd called it Mercer and Family Auto, back when family meant something more than a word on a faded sign he kept meaning to take down. He kept the shop running because he didn't know what else to do with his hands. His hands needed work, or they'd remember things he couldn't afford to remember. He was rinsing out the coffee mug when he heard the knocking. It wasn't a polite knock. It wasn't the knock of a neighbor stopping by to borrow something or a stranger whose car had broken down on the highway. It was desperate, urgent. The kind of knocking that a person does when they've been running and they've finally found a door, and they're praying with everything they have left that someone is on the other side of it. Jack set the mug down. He stood still for a moment, listening over the sound of rain hammering the tin roof of the garage. The knocking came again, harder this time, and then a voice, high and breathless and young. "Please, please somebody be home, please." Jack moved through the house without turning on any lights. Old habit. He kept the porch light off because light meant people could see you, and people seeing you meant they'd want something from you, and Jack had spent 12 years making himself unavailable to the wanting of others. He unlocked the front door and opened it, and the storm came at him sideways. There were 3 of them. A boy, maybe 10 years old, soaked to the skin, holding a bundle wrapped in a blue blanket against his chest, with the fierce locked-down grip of someone who would not let go under any circumstances. A girl, younger, maybe 7 or 8, pressed tight against the boy's side with a stuffed rabbit clutched under one arm, and her eyes fixed on Jack with an expression that was not fear. Exactly, it was something older than fear. Something that had moved past fear into a kind of exhausted watchfulness that no child her age should know how to wear. And the bundle in the boy's arms was moving, making small broken sounds, the kind of sounds that reach into a person's chest and squeeze. "Please," the boy said again. His voice was steady, but Jack could see his arms shaking. "She's getting cold. I've been trying to keep her warm, but she's getting cold, and I didn't know where else to go." Jack looked past them into the dark. The highway was empty. The rain was coming down in silver sheets. Then for just a moment, just one moment before the darkness swallowed it, he saw the red taillights of a vehicle at the far end of the road. Not moving, just sitting there in the rain, watching. Then it was gone. Jack stepped back from the door. "Come inside." The boy moved immediately, pressing past him with the careful, practiced motion of someone used to moving fast through tight spaces. The girl hesitated on the threshold, looking up at Jack with those old eyes. "It's all right," Jack said. He didn't know why he said it. It wasn't a thing he'd said to anyone in a long time. The words felt strange in his mouth. "Come on in out of the rain." She came inside. Jack locked the door behind her. He turned on the kitchen light, just the kitchen, just enough to see, and the boy laid the bundle down on the kitchen table with the focused care of a surgeon, peeling back the layers of the blue blanket with trembling hands. The baby underneath was small. Too small. Jack thought even for a newborn, and her skin had a waxy, overheated quality that made the back of his neck go cold. "How old is she?" Jack asked. "She'll be 3 weeks tomorrow," the boy said. "Her name is Hope. She running a fever. She's been hot all day. She drank the last of her formula about 2 hours ago." Jack was already moving toward the cabinet above the refrigerator where he kept a first aid kit that was probably 15 years out of date. He wasn't a doctor. He had no business treating a sick infant. He knew that. But the boy was watching him with eyes that said he had decided somewhere in the wet dark of this terrible night that Jack Mercer was the person who was going to fix this, and the weight of that decision was something Jack hadn't felt in so long that it nearly buckled his knees. "There's formula," the girl said. It was the first time she'd spoken. Her voice was quiet and careful, like someone who had learned to measure out her words. "In my bag. I've got 2 more cans." Jack turned and looked at her. She was holding out a small backpack, waterlogged, one strap nearly torn off, and looking at him with that watchful expression that he was already starting to understand was just how she looked at the world. "What's your name?" Jack asked. "Lily. And you're—" He looked at the boy. "Ethan." The boy straightened up from the table. He was trying to look older than he was, Jack realized, trying to hold himself like a man. "I'm Ethan. She's my sister. And Hope is—" He stopped. "Hope is ours. We take care of her." Jack found a small pot, filled it at the sink, set it on the stove to warm. Lily handed him the formula without being asked, and showed him the right measurements with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been doing this for weeks. She probably had been. "Is there someone I should call?" Jack said. He kept his voice even, the way you'd keep your hand steady, working around a hot engine. "Your mother?" "Your father." Ethan and Lily exchanged a look. It lasted less than a second, but Jack had spent his life reading the small mechanics of things, and he caught it clean. "Our mother sent us here," Ethan said. "Where is she?" Another look. Longer this time. "We don't know," Lily said quietly. Jack tested the formula against his wrist, the way Margaret used to test their daughter's bottles. The memory came at him sudden and hard, and he pressed it down, and then he brought the bottle to the table and looked at the baby and stopped. He had not held a baby since Sophie. He had not touched one, not been in the same room as one, if he could help it, not for 12 years. There was a reason for that. There was a very specific and carefully maintained reason for that. "Can you—" he started. "Please," Ethan said. The word was soft and direct and without any performance. "She's better when a grown-up holds her. She calms down." Jack sat down in the kitchen chair he'd sat in every morning for 12 years. He picked up the baby. He held the bottle to her lips, and Hope, small and feverish, and very much alive, grabbed the bottle with both hands and began to drink with the focused urgency of the very young and the very hungry. And something happened in Jack Mercer's chest that he could not name and did not want to look at directly. "There's a note," Ethan said. He reached into the front pocket of his soaked jeans and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It had been wet and dried and wet again. The writing on it had blurred at the edges, but was still legible. He set it on the table in front of Jack. Jack looked at it without picking it up. The handwriting was a woman's, small and fast, and slightly tilted the handwriting of someone who wrote quickly because they were always busy or always afraid. "Please protect them all. Someone is looking for us." That was all it said. Jack read it twice. Then he looked up at Ethan. "Who sent you here?" "Our mom." "I understand that. I'm asking why here, why me? I don't know your family. I don't know your mother. Ethan sat down across from him. The boy's face was doing something complicated, working through the calculation of how much truth to offer and how much to hold back. Jack recognized the calculation. He'd been running it himself for 12 years. She said you were the only one she trusted, Ethan said finally. She said you helped her once, a long time ago. She said you were the kind of man who stays. The kind of man who stays, Jack repeated. Yes, sir? Jack looked down at the baby in his arms. Hope had finished the bottle and was watching him with the unfocused, serious gaze of a newborn who hadn't learned yet that the world wasn't always safe. He thought about calling social services. He thought about calling the sheriff's department. He thought about the sensible, responsible, legally correct thing to do, which was to hand these children to someone whose job it was to handle them and go back to his empty kitchen and his cold coffee and his silence. He thought about the red taillights sitting in the rain at the end of the road. All right, he said. We'll figure the rest out in the morning. Right now, I need you two to eat something, and then I need you to sleep. Lily said, We haven't eaten since this morning. I know. Jack stood carefully the baby against his shoulder and opened the refrigerator with his free hand. I've got bread. I've got eggs. I've got some leftover chili that's probably still good. He paused. You eat chili. We eat anything, Ethan said, and the bluntness of it, the matter-of-fact hunger of it, hit Jack somewhere low and hard. He made eggs because they were fastest. He made them on the old gas stove, while Lily sat at the table and watched him with her careful eyes. And Ethan walked quietly through the house, the way a watchful animal walks through unfamiliar territory, checking windows, checking doors, his head turning at every sound. Jack watched the boy do it and didn't say anything, because what would he say? Relax. This boy had not relaxed in a very long time, and telling him to do it now would be an insult to whatever had made him this way. They ate at the kitchen table at midnight. Jack put Hope in a laundry basket lined with towels because he didn't have a crib, and he wasn't going to pretend he did. The baby slept. Lily ate 2 full portions of eggs and half a piece of toast, and then put her head down on her arms and was asleep before Jack could find sheets for the spare bedroom. Ethan stayed awake. Jack carried Lily to the spare room and laid her on the bare mattress and covered her with a quilt that had been in the closet since Margaret put it there. He came back to the kitchen and sat down across from Ethan, and the two of them looked at each other across the kitchen table, the way 2 people look at each other when they both know they're about to have an honest conversation. Tell me what I need to know, Jack said. Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked older than 10. He looked like someone who had been old for a long time. Mom said don't tell anyone. Your mom isn't here right now. I am. And I've got 3 children in my house in the middle of the night, and a note that says someone is looking for you. And I just saw a truck parked at the end of my road in the dark. So you're going to tell me what you can, and I'm going to decide what to do with it. Ethan looked at his hands. He had grease under his fingernails, Jack noticed. The kind of grease that comes from working on machines, not from playing. There's a man, Ethan said slowly. His name is Calvin Rhodes. He owns the big construction company over in Maricopa County. He does work out near the border. I know of him, Jack said. He kept his voice neutral. Mom worked in his office for a while, last year. She did bookkeeping. Ethan stopped, started again. She found some stuff, in the files. She said it was about workers' people who came over from Mexico to work on his projects, and then they... He stopped again. They disappeared. She said there were names. A lot of names. The kitchen felt very quiet. She went to the police, Jack asked. Ethan laughed. It was not a boy's laugh. It was a short, flat sound that belonged on an older face. The sheriff out in that county plays golf with Rhodes every Saturday. Mom said she knew that before she even picked up the phone. So she ran. She hit us, first at my aunt's, then with a lady from church, then... He spread his hands. It kept not working. Someone always found out where we were. She said there was a leak somewhere. She said she couldn't trust anyone with a phone or an address that Rhodes could find. But she trusted me. She said she met you on the highway when she was 19. Said her car broke down and you fixed it, and you didn't ask for anything, and you didn't try anything, and when she asked why, you just said that's what people are supposed to do for each other. Ethan looked up. She said she never forgot that. She said some men you can just tell. Jack was quiet for a moment. He didn't remember the girl from the highway. He had stopped for people on that road 100 times over the years, because that was what you did in the desert, where a broken-down car in the summer heat could kill you. He didn't remember her specifically, but he believed the story because it was exactly the kind of thing he would have done, and the kind of thing he would not have thought worth remembering. "Where did she go?" he asked. "She said she had to get the evidence somewhere safe. She had copies of documents. She was going to mail them somewhere, she said, and then come get us." Ethan's voice was steady and level and completely controlled, and Jack understood that this steadiness was costing the boy an enormous amount. "That was 11 days ago." 11 days. "Yes, sir." "And in 11 days, you've heard nothing." "No, sir." Jack looked at the baby sleeping in the laundry basket. He looked at the crack of light under the door of the spare room where Lily was sleeping. He looked at this 10-year-old boy sitting across from him with grease on his hands and old eyes and 12 days of being the only adult these children had. "All right," Jack said. "All right, what?" "All right, you're staying here until we figure out what happened to your mother and what to do about this road situation. You sleep. I'll watch tonight." Ethan stared at him. Something moved across the boy's face, a loosening like a knot, finally giving, and for just a moment, Jack saw the 10-year-old that was underneath all that hard-won control. "You believe me. I believe you. Most adults don't." "I know," Jack said. "Go sleep." Ethan stood up. He picked up his plate and carried it to the sink and rinsed it without being asked. Then he stopped in the doorway and turned back. "Mr. Mercer." "Just Jack." "Jack." The boy hesitated. "The truck you saw on the road, was it black long bed? No plates?" Jack felt something cold move through him. "Yes." Ethan nodded, once the nod of someone receiving information they already suspected. "That's one of his. They've been following us for 3 days." He paused. "I didn't know they found us again until just now." Then he went down the hall to the spare room and closed the door. Jack sat alone in his kitchen, with a baby sleeping in a laundry basket, and a cold stove, and a piece of paper on the table that said, "Please protect them all." And he thought about the 12 years of silence he had built so carefully around himself, and about red taillights disappearing into the desert rain, and about the way a 10-year-old boy carries a newborn against his chest in a thunderstorm with the locked-down certainty of someone who knows that if he lets go, everything falls. He did not sleep that night. He sat in the kitchen chair, where he'd eaten alone for 12 years, and he watched the baby breathe, and he listened to the storm move on across the desert, and somewhere around 3 in the morning a truck drove slowly past on the highway without stopping, its headlights sweeping briefly across the ceiling of the kitchen, and Jack sat very still and waited until the sound of its engine faded into the dark. Then he got up and made coffee, and stood at the window until the sky began to go gray and the desert began to come out of the dark. And Red Hollow, Arizona came back to life, one pale inch at a time, and the 3 children sleeping in his house breathed on unharmed through the long remainder of the night. And for the first time in 12 years, Jack Mercer had a reason to watch the sun come up. The sun came up hard and hot the way it always did in Red Hollow in July, and by 7 in the morning the temperature had already crossed 90. Jack had drunk 3 cups of coffee and was working on his 4th when he heard the first scream. It came from the spare room, sharp and high and full of a terror that had nothing to do with waking up. It was a scream that came from somewhere inside sleep, from whatever place the mind goes when it stops protecting itself. Jack was down the hall in 4 steps. He pushed open the door and found Lily sitting straight up on the mattress, both hands pressed flat against her chest, eyes wide open and seeing something that wasn't in the room. "Hey!" Jack crouched down to her level. "Hey, you're here. You're in the house. Nobody's coming in." Lily blinked, came back slowly. Her breathing was ragged and shallow. Ethan was already awake in the corner of the room where he'd apparently slept on the floor rather than take the bed, and he was watching his sister with an expression of exhausted familiarity. This had happened before many times before. "It's the same one," Lily said to no one in particular. "The man in the parking lot, he always has the same face." "What man?" Jack asked. Lily looked at him like she'd forgotten he was a stranger. Then she picked up the stuffed rabbit from beside her and pressed it under her chin and didn't answer. Ethan caught Jack's eye and gave a small shake of his head. Later. Jack nodded and straightened up. "Breakfast in 10 minutes," he said, as if this were a normal morning, as if screaming children and sleepless nights and black trucks on the highway were things that happened every day in this kitchen. He said it in the same flat, practical voice he used when he told customers how long a repair was going to take. Sometimes that was the most useful thing you could offer a person, the sound of someone who was not panicking. He went out to the garage to check on something he'd been thinking about since 3 in the morning, and he found it inside of 2 minutes. The lock on the side door had been worked. Not broken. Whoever it was had been careful, had known what they were doing, but the scratch marks on the plate were fresh, and the door had been opened and closed again, and a wooden crate of old parts near the back wall had been moved about 8 inches from where Jack always kept it. Someone had been in his garage in the night. While he sat in the kitchen watching the baby breathe, someone had come through the side door and gone through his things and left again, quiet as smoke. Jack stood in the middle of the garage for a long moment. Then he went back inside and made pancakes. He didn't tell the children what he'd found. Not yet. Instead, he watched Ethan eat the boy put away 6 pancakes without slowing down, and he watched Lily feed small pieces of hers to the stuffed rabbit with a seriousness that made his chest ache. And he fed Hope her morning bottle and felt the baby's forehead with the back of his hand, and did not like what he felt there. The fever was lower than last night, but it hadn't broken. It was sitting there in her small body, like something waiting to decide. "She needs to see a doctor," Jack said. Ethan put his fork down. "We can't go to a hospital. They log names. Rhodes has people who look at those logs." "I'm not talking about a hospital. Doc Harmon's been practicing in this town for 30 years. He makes house calls. He doesn't log anything he doesn't have to." Ethan and Lily exchanged their look again, that wordless negotiation Jack was getting faster at reading. Finally, Ethan said, "Okay, but just him. Nobody else." Jack called Doc Harmon from the kitchen phone. While it rang, he walked as far as the cord would reach and looked out the window, and there parked at the far edge of the property, where the gravel lot met the scrubby line of desert brush, was a dark blue sedan he had never seen before. Not black, blue, different vehicle. He watched it for the 30 seconds it took Doc Harmon to answer, and by the time he'd made the appointment, it was gone. Doc Harmon came at 11. He was 71 years old with thick white eyebrows and hands that still didn't shake, and he had delivered half the people in Red Hollow and buried the other half, and was not a man who asked unnecessary questions. He checked Hope over in the kitchen, while Ethan stood 2 feet away with his arms crossed, and Lily watched from the doorway. "Mild dehydration, low-grade fever," the doctor said, repacking his bag. "Keep her hydrated. Keep the formula consistent. Keep her out of the heat. She'll be fine." He looked at Jack over his glasses. "You want to tell me what's going on?" "Not yet," Jack said. Harmon studied him for a moment. He'd known Jack Mercer since before the accident. He'd been at both funerals. He understood perhaps better than anyone in Red Hollow what it had cost this man to open his door. "You need anything?" Harmon said. "You call me, day or night." "I will." "And Jack." The old doctor paused at the door. "Be careful who else you call." Jack wasn't sure what to make of that. But he filed it away the way he filed away the scratch marks on the garage door and the blue sedan and Lily's scream at 7 in the morning, filed it in the part of his mind where he kept things that hadn't shown him their full shape yet. He called the sheriff's department at noon. He didn't know why he expected anything different. He identified himself, said he had some concerns about suspicious vehicles in the area, and a family situation that might require follow-up, kept it vague the way Ethan had coached him without knowing he was doing it. The dispatcher put him through to a deputy named Carver, and Deputy Carver listened to about 45 seconds of what Jack was saying before he interrupted. "You said the name Calvin Rhodes. I said there may be some connection to Mr. Mercer. Carver's voice was flat and carefully empty. I'm going to stop you right there. Calvin Rhodes is a well-respected businessman and a personal friend of Sheriff Tate. If you're making accusations against him, I'd strongly encourage you to think about whether you have anything concrete to back that up, because making accusations without evidence against a man of his standing is the kind of thing that makes a lot of trouble for a lot of people. Jack was quiet for a moment. I haven't made any accusations, he said. I told you I had suspicious vehicles on my property. I'll make a note of it. You have a good day now. The line went dead. Jack held the phone for a moment, then set it down. Ethan was leaning in the kitchen doorway watching him. Told you, the boy said. Yeah, Jack said. You told me. That afternoon, Jack drove into town for formula and groceries. He left Ethan with explicit instructions to keep the doors locked and not to open them for anyone. And while he was at the hardware store picking up a new deadbolt, a man named Pete Gruber, who ran the feed store next door, stopped him in the parking lot and said low and direct, Jack, word of advice. Whatever's going on out at your place, and I don't know what it is, and I'm not asking be smart about it, Rhodes has got friends in this county that you don't want looking your direction. Pete walked on, without waiting for an answer. Jack drove home with the groceries and the deadbolt and a cold, clarifying anger that he hadn't felt in years. He was good at anger when it had somewhere specific to go. He'd just been short on destinations. He installed the new deadbolt while Ethan watched and handed him tools with the quiet attentiveness of someone who understood machines and the patience required to work on them. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. There was a comfortable grammar in mechanical workhand. This hold, this don't let that slip, that didn't require words. And Jack had almost forgotten how much he missed having another person in the garage. You know how to do any of this? Jack asked. Some, Ethan said. My grandfather had a truck. I used to watch him. Where's your grandfather now? Dead, 3 years ago. Jack nodded and kept working. You want me to show you how this fits? Ethan stepped closer. Jack walked him through the mechanism, bolt, strike plate, how the throw works, what makes a deadbolt actually dead. And the boy absorbed it the way dry ground absorbs rain. Fast and complete. Jack recognized that quality. Some people had it with machines. You either had it or you didn't, and this kid had it. Your mom, Jack said, keeping his eyes on the work. She tell you anything about what she was going to do, specific plan where she was going. She said she had copies of the documents. She said she was going to get them somewhere safe where Rhodes couldn't get to them. Ethan paused. She said she might mail them somewhere. She was scared to carry them. Something shifted in the back of Jack's mind, a detail connecting to another detail. Mail them where? She didn't say. Jack set down the screwdriver. Ethan, think carefully. Did she say anything about who she trusted to hold on to important things? The boy's face changed, a slow realization moving through it. She talked about you, more than once. She said you were the kind of man who... He stopped. His eyes went wide. She said you were the kind of man who would hold on to something important without knowing what it was. She said that specifically, that you'd hold it without opening it. Jack stood up from his crouch so fast his knees popped. He walked through the kitchen and out to the garage and went directly to the stack of mail on the workbench, 3 weeks of it, maybe a month, rubber banded together the way he rubber banded it every time he brought it in from the box, because he paid his bills online now and rarely opened paper mail anymore. He pulled off the rubber band. He went through it piece by piece, utility bill, auto parts, catalog, insurance, renewal, junk. There. A padded envelope, no return address, postmarked 11 days ago from a town 40 miles south of Red Hollow. His name and address in a woman's handwriting, small, fast, slightly tilted. He stood holding it for a long time. Ethan had followed him into the garage and was standing in the doorway very still. Don't open it, Jack said. What? Not yet. If this is what I think it is, if this is evidence, we can't handle it more than we have to. We can't do anything wrong with it." He thought about Doc Harmon's parting words. "Be careful who else you call." I need to think about who to give this to. Rhodes will know you have it. Maybe, but he doesn't know we found it yet. Jack set the envelope back under the stack of mail exactly where it had been. The people who went through the garage last night, they were looking for something. They didn't find it because it was in the house, not in here. Which means they're not certain it came here. Which means we have a little time. Ethan stared at the mail stack. What if it's not enough to stop him? Let's find out what's in it before we worry about that. What if Mom already... Ethan stopped. His jaw worked. He was fighting something that was trying to come up through his chest, and he was winning barely the way he always seemed to win these things, by a margin so thin it was almost invisible. What if she didn't make it? Jack looked at the boy. He wanted to offer something clean and useful, a reassurance, a certainty, something adult and solid to stand on. But Ethan was too smart for false comfort, and had probably been offered too much of it already by well-meaning people, who then disappeared. "I don't know," Jack said. "I'm not going to pretend I do. But right now we act like she's out there and she needs this to matter. We keep these kids safe, we protect that envelope, and we find somebody we can trust." He paused. "Okay." Ethan swallowed, nodded. "Okay." They went back inside. Lily was sitting at the kitchen table with a pad of paper and one of Jack's pencils, drawing something with the focused intensity she brought to everything. Jack glanced at it as he passed and stopped moving. It was a man, rendered in the slightly outsized, disproportionate way of a child drawing large head, angular body, but detailed in ways that were not childlike at all. The man was holding something that was clearly a gun, and behind him she'd drawn what looked like a line of small figures, too many to count, and behind them a rectangle that might have been a truck or a building, and over all of it, pressing down from the top of the page, she'd drawn a heavy black sky. Jack looked at the drawing for a long moment. Then he looked at Lily. She was watching him over the top of the paper with her careful, waiting eyes. "Is that the man from your dream?" he asked. She turned the paper back toward herself and looked at it. "He had a ring," she said. "A big gold ring. He wore it on his right hand. Mom told us if we ever saw a man with that ring, we should run and not look back." "Did you ever see this man in real life, not in dreams?" Lily set the pencil down. She lined it up carefully parallel to the edge of the paper, the way someone arranges things when they need something to be in order. "Once," she said, "he came to our house. Mom told us to hide in the closet and stay quiet, and she went and talked to him at the door." She paused. She was shaking when he left. I could see her hands shaking from the closet. The kitchen was very quiet. "How long ago was that?" Jack asked. "Before we started hiding. Maybe 5 months ago." Which meant Calvin Rhodes had been inside their home. Which meant he'd looked at their mother and decided she was a problem to be handled. Which meant whatever was in that padded envelope on the workbench had been worth to him, whatever it took to make it disappear. Jack looked at the baby in the laundry basket. He looked at Lily's drawing. He looked at Ethan standing in the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed the same way he always crossed them, like he was physically holding himself together. Then Deputy Carver's car pulled up in the driveway. Jack heard the tires on the gravel before he saw the car, and he put a hand on Lily's shoulder just briefly, just long enough, and said to Ethan, "Take her and Hope to the spare room. Close the door. Don't come out until I come get you." Ethan moved without hesitating. Lily closed her drawing inside the pad and followed her brother. Jack heard the spare room door click shut. He went to the front door and opened it before Carver could knock. The deputy was young, maybe 30, and he had the look of a man who had been sent to deliver a message he hadn't written. He stood on the porch with his thumbs in his belt and his expression arranged into something that was meant to look casual and wasn't. "Afternoon, Mr. Mercer. Sorry to bother you at home." "No, you're not," Jack said. "What do you want?" Carver's expression flickered. "Just a friendly visit. Follow up on your call this morning." He looked past Jack into the house. "You got company. What I've got in my house is my business. Sure, sure. Carver rocked back on his heels. Listen, I'm going to be straight with you man to man. Somebody told somebody that you might have some house guests who are connected to an ongoing family legal situation. Custody matter. Complicated. It'd be real easy for things to go sideways if people start making it into something it's not. He looked at Jack steadily. You understand what I'm saying. A custody matter, Jack said. That's right. Children missing from their family. Something like that. And that family would be... Carver said nothing. He didn't need to. You tell whoever sent you, Jack said, keeping his voice even and low, that I'm a private citizen on private property, and that if anybody has a legal claim on anything under my roof, they are welcome to present that claim through the proper legal channels, and that until they do, I suggest you get off my driveway. Carver stared at him. The young man's face was doing the calculation how much of this was bluster, how much was bone. Whatever he found there apparently settled something for him, because he took a step back. Stay out of family business, Mr. Mercer, he said. That's just friendly advice. He got in his car and drove away. Jack stood in the open door and watched the dust settle behind the deputy's tires. His heart was hitting hard against his ribs. He hadn't felt this particular kind of alive in a very long time, the alive that comes from standing in front of something that wants to move through you and refusing to step aside. He went to the spare room. 3 faces looked up at him from the bed where Ethan and Lily sat with Hope between them. We're all right, Jack said. Ethan was watching him, the way he'd been watching him since the first night, measuring, calculating, deciding. What did he want? He wanted to scare me. Did it work? Jack considered the question the way he considered difficult things honestly without decoration. Not enough, he said, and Ethan, for the first time since he had knocked on a stranger's door in a thunderstorm and handed over the most important thing in his world, did something that cracked Jack clean open from the inside. The boy smiled. 3 days passed. 3 days of deadbolts and drawn blinds, and Jack sleeping in 2-hour shifts with one ear always open toward the hallway. 3 days of Ethan learning the names of every tool on the pegboard above the workbench, and Lily filling page after page of Jack's old notepads with drawings that got quieter and less frightened as the days went on. 3 days of Hope's fever finally breaking on the second morning, the baby opening her eyes wider than Jack had seen yet, and grabbing his thumb with both hands and holding on. 3 days and Jack still hadn't opened the envelope. He told himself he was waiting for the right moment. He told himself he needed to think through who to contact first. Both of those things were true. But the deeper truth, the one he admitted to himself around 2 in the morning on the third night, was that he was afraid of what was inside it. Not for himself. For the children sleeping down the hall. Because whatever was in that padded envelope had already cost one woman her safety, and possibly her life. And once Jack opened it, once he knew what it contained, he couldn't unknow it. And the children couldn't either. On the morning of the 4th day, Ethan came into the kitchen before Jack had finished his first cup of coffee and sat down across from him and said, "Open it." Jack looked at him. "I've been thinking about it for 3 days," Ethan said. "We need to know what we're dealing with. We can't protect it if we don't know what it is." "You're 10 years old," Jack said. "I know how old I am." Jack drank the rest of his coffee. Then he went to the garage and got the envelope and brought it back to the kitchen table and opened it with a steak knife, careful not to tear more than necessary. Inside was a folded sheaf of photocopied documents. Payroll records, contracts, handwritten ledgers, and a standard cassette tape wrapped in a piece of notebook paper with 3 words written on it, "Play this last." Jack looked at the documents first. He was not an accountant and not a lawyer, but he was a man who had spent his adult life reading the actual condition of things versus what people claimed about them, and what he read in those photocopied pages made his jaw tighten and his hands go still. Names, dates, payment amounts that appeared in one column and vanished from another. A list of workers, 41 names, most of them Spanish, with dates beside each name that stopped abruptly. No termination records, no forwarding addresses. No paper trail after those final dates, Just names and then silence where names used to be. 41 people. What does it say? Ethan asked. It says your mother was right about everything, Jack said. He found an old cassette player in the hall closet. Margaret had used it for audiobooks on long drives, and he brought it to the kitchen and put the tape in and pressed play. He almost told Ethan to go to the other room. He almost protected the boy from what was coming. But he looked at Ethan's face and understood that this child had been living inside this truth for months already, carrying it without anyone to share the weight and sending him out of the room. Now would be one more way of telling him he was too young to matter. So they both listened. The voice on the tape was a woman's, clear and steady with the careful diction of someone who had practiced what they were going to say. She identified herself as Sarah Voss. She stated the date 6 weeks ago. She described her position in Rhodes Construction's accounting office and what she had found there and what she believed it meant. She named names. She cited document numbers. She was precise and organized and completely without hysteria, which somehow made it worse. The calm of it, the way she laid out 41 lives and their abrupt disappearances with the meticulous composure of someone who had accepted that this was probably the last careful thing she would do. Near the end, her voice shifted. Just slightly. The composure cracked at one small point, like a hairline fracture in something that was otherwise solid. Ethan Lily, baby. Hope, if you're hearing this, you're somewhere safe. I need you to believe that I didn't leave you. I need you to believe that everything I did, so that you would have somewhere to go back to when this is over. I love you so much. It is the only thing bigger than what I'm afraid of. Be good. Be brave. You already know how. The tape clicked off. Nobody said anything for a long time. Lily was standing in the kitchen doorway. Jack didn't know how long she'd been there. She was holding the stuffed rabbit against her chest with both arms, and her face was doing something complicated that she wasn't trying to hide, which told Jack she was past the point of hiding things, and into somewhere raw and open that he recognized from the inside. Ethan stood up abruptly and walked out the back door. Jack heard his footsteps on the gravel. Then nothing. Jack went to the doorway where Lily stood. He crouched down. At his eye level, her face was very serious, and very young, and very tired. Your mom made this tape for someone to find, he said. She planned this carefully. She's not the kind of person who plans carefully and then doesn't come back. Lily considered this. Do you believe that? I do. Is it true even if you're not sure? Jack held her gaze. I'm sure enough to act like it's true, he said. That's the best any of us can do. Lily nodded slowly. She moved past him into the kitchen and sat down and looked at the cassette player and then looked at Jack. What do we do now? Now, Jack said, I make some phone calls. He spent the afternoon trying to reach anyone with federal jurisdiction. Anyone who was not. Sheriff Tate was not Deputy Carver, was not in the overlapping circle of Rhodes's considerable local influence. He called the FBI field office in Phoenix and got a recorded message. He called a number Doc Harmon gave him, which turned out to be a retired federal marshal who listened carefully and said he knew a name in the Phoenix office and would make a call. He called a woman named Patricia Green, who wrote for the Arizona Republic and had covered the construction industry for 12 years, and she picked up on the second ring and listened without interrupting for 11 minutes while Jack told her what he had. I need to see those documents, she said when he was done. And that tape. I need to know you're not connected to Rhodes before I show you anything. Fair. Give me 2 days. I'll send you something in writing that documents where I've been and who I've been reporting on for the last 5 years. You'll see his name isn't on the list. 1 day, Jack said. A pause. 1 day, she agreed. He hung up. He felt for the first time since the night of the storm like he was fighting on a field where the ground was level, not winning yet, but level. That was when Ethan came back inside. The boy had been gone almost 2 hours. His eyes were dry but red around the edges, the way eyes get when someone has done their crying thoroughly and completely and then decided to be finished with it. He sat down at the kitchen table and put his hands flat on the surface and looked at Jack. There's something else I didn't tell you, Ethan said. Jack sat down. The burner phone. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and put a cheap prepaid cell phone on the table between them. Mom gave it to me before she sent us away. She said if I absolutely had to, I could call the number saved in it. She said it was someone she trusted. But she told me not to use it unless things were really bad, because it could tell people where we were. Jack looked at the phone. How bad does it have to be? I think this is it, Ethan said. Who's the number? I don't know. She didn't tell me. Jack picked up the phone. One number saved in the contacts labeled only with a single letter R. He looked at it for a moment, then handed the phone back to Ethan. Not yet. We've got a reporter and a federal contact moving. Let's not put the location out on a cell network until we know which direction those are going. Ethan nodded. He started to put the phone away. It rang. Both of them stared at it. The screen showed a number not the one saved in the contacts. An unknown number. It rang again. Jack said, "Answer it." Ethan picked it up. "Hello." A man's voice came through low and unhurried. "I know where you are. I know you've been there 4 days. I want you to understand that I've known since the first morning, so all the business with the reporter and the federal marshal contact, I know about those too." A pause. "Tell the mechanic I said hello. Tell him he did a brave thing taking you in. Tell him brave things have consequences." The line went dead. Ethan put the phone down on the table. Jack was already on his feet. "Grab your sisters. Get the envelope and the tape. You're going to walk, not run, walk out the back door and across to the Hendersons' place 2 properties over. Mrs. Henderson is 70 years old and she's got a rotary phone, and Rhodes doesn't know she exists. You knock on her door and you tell her Jack Mercer sent you, and you ask to use her phone to call Doc Harmon. You stay there until I come for you." "What are you going to do?" "Make sure there's something worth coming back to." Jack was moving toward the garage. "Go, now." Ethan grabbed his sisters. Jack heard the back door open and close. He went into the garage and took the envelope from where he'd stashed it behind a loose board in the back wall, a hiding place he'd never shown anyone, and he put it inside a metal toolbox that locked, and he shoved the toolbox under the workbench behind 3 others like it. Then he went back into the house. He was standing in the kitchen when he smelled it. Smoke. Not wood smoke. Chemical smoke rubber, and paint and hot metal. The smell of a structure fire starting in a vehicle or in something industrial. He was through the garage door in 4 steps. The east wall was already going. Someone had poured accelerant along the outside and lit it, and the dry desert summer had been waiting for exactly this kind of invitation, and the fire was moving with a speed and confidence that took his breath away. The workbench, the toolbox, the locked metal box with 41 names inside it. Jack made a decision that he would not be able to fully explain to anyone later. He went toward the fire instead of away from it. He pulled his shirt up over his face. He got low. He moved along the floor toward the workbench, while the heat pressed down on him like a physical weight, and the smoke took on a texture that was almost solid. He found the toolbox by feel. It was hot to the touch, but not impossible. He grabbed it with both hands and pulled it out from under the workbench and stood up and ran. He came out the front of the garage coughing so hard his knees almost gave. He kept moving. He got to the driveway, got to the gravel, and then he stopped and turned back because there was a sound he thought he'd heard inside the garage, and he wasn't sure, and he could not be not sure. "Ethan." His voice was a wreck from the smoke. "Ethan." Nothing. "Ethan." The garage roof was going now. Half the structure already orange with it. Jack took 2 steps back toward the door, and then a shape came through the smoke at him, and he grabbed Ethan by both arms and held on. The boy was coughing, eyes streaming, but he was upright and moving. "I heard you go back in." Ethan gasped. "I came to get you." "Where's Lily? Where's Hope?" "Hope? At the Hendersons. I got them there first and came back." Ethan gripped Jack's arm. "Don't be angry. I wasn't going to leave you in there." Jack looked at this 10-year-old boy who had come back into a burning building for a man he'd known 4 days, and something happened in his chest that he didn't have a name for. Something that was bigger than gratitude and more permanent than relief. People were coming out of houses now. The fire was visible for half a mile in the desert summer air, with the evening wind picking up the garage lit the sky like a signal. Neighbors, strangers, people Jack recognized, and people he didn't. Pulling up in trucks and cars, standing at the edge of the property with their phones out. And Jack stood in the middle of it, toolbox at his feet, smoke-blackened, coughing, and looked at all of them, looking at him, and something in him that had been quiet for 12 years stood up. "Listen to me." His voice came out hoarse, but it carried. The crowd went still. "My name is Jack Mercer. I have lived in this town for 30 years. Most of you know me, or know of me. A woman named Sarah Voss trusted me with the lives of her 3 children because she didn't have anyone else to trust, and tonight a man named Calvin Rhodes tried to burn down my property and destroy evidence that documents the disappearance of 41 people. He put his hand on the toolbox. The evidence is right here. It didn't burn. And tomorrow morning, I am going to hand it to a federal contact and a reporter from the Arizona Republic, and if anyone in this crowd is on Rhodes's payroll, you are welcome to go tell him that." Nobody moved. A woman in the back. Jack didn't know her name, had never spoken to her, had seen her at the gas station once, said loudly, "I'm calling the Phoenix news stations right now." "So am I," said a man beside her. "I've got it all on video," said someone else. All of it. Him coming out of the fire. The crowd was not the crowd Jack had kept at arm's length for 12 years. He was seeing them differently now. Or maybe he was seeing himself differently. Seeing what happened when a man stepped out of his own silence and into the center of things. It was terrifying, and it was necessary, and it was underneath both of those. Something that felt almost like coming home. His phone rang. Doc Harmon. "The children are safe," the old doctor said without preamble. "I got your boy's call. I went to the Hendersons myself. Lily and the baby are fine. Ethan?" Jack looked at the boy standing beside him, covered in soot, watching the garage burn with the resolute expression of someone watching something that needed to be finished. "Ethan's with me," Jack said. "He's all right." "Good." Harmon's voice was careful. "Jack, the federal marshal contact I gave you, he called me back an hour ago. He said there's been movement on the Rhodes investigation at the federal level for 8 months. They've been building a case. They needed what they couldn't get, someone on the inside willing to go on record." A pause. "They've been looking for Sarah Voss since she went underground." Jack's hand tightened on the phone. "Tell me what that means." "It means she made contact with them. It means she's been in protective custody for 6 days. Harmon's voice softened. "It means she's alive, Jack." The garage burned. The crowd held their phones up to the orange sky. And Jack Mercer put a hand on Ethan's shoulder, not gently, not carefully, but solid and certain, the way you put your hand on something you're not going to let go of, and said, "I've got something to tell you." Ethan looked up at him, and for the second time in 4 days, in the middle of everything that was falling apart and burning down and coming undone, that 10-year-old boy allowed himself to cry. Ethan cried for exactly 4 minutes. Jack knew because he stood beside the boy and counted, not in any calculated way, but the way you count the seconds of a storm, measuring it by instinct, by the need to know when the worst of it has passed. 4 minutes, and then Ethan wiped his face on his sleeve and straightened up and said, "I want to see her." "I know," Jack said. "We're going to work toward that." "When?" "I don't know yet, but she's safe. Hold on to that." The fire trucks arrived 17 minutes after the garage went up. By then the structure was mostly gone. The east wall collapsed and the roof caved in, and the firefighters spent the better part of 2 hours managing the perimeter and making sure the house itself didn't catch. Jack stood at the edge of the property and watched everything he'd built with his hands over 30 years reduce itself to black framework and ash. And he felt, which surprised him, almost nothing about it. The building was gone. The people inside his house were not. The math on that was simple enough that grief didn't get much of a foothold. 2 federal agents arrived 40 minutes after the fire trucks. They came in an unmarked car, and they moved through the crowd with the quiet authority of people who had been doing this long enough that they didn't need to announce themselves. The taller one found Jack without asking anyone where he was, which told Jack that someone had been watching this property and this situation for longer than 4 days. Mr. Mercer. The agent extended his hand. Special Agent Donna Reyes, FBI Phoenix Field Office. I understand you have material relevant to an ongoing federal investigation. Jack looked at her steadily. How long have you been building a case on Rhodes? 8 months. And in 8 months, you couldn't protect one woman and 3 children without her having to run. Reyes held his gaze without flinching. No, we couldn't. And that's a failure I'm going to have to live with. But we're here now, and what you have in that toolbox could close this and close it permanently. She paused. Sarah Voss told us about you. She said if the documents made it anywhere, they made it to you. Jack picked up the toolbox and held it out. 41 names, he said. Make sure they get counted. Reyes took the box with both hands. Yes, sir. The second agent was already moving through what remained of the garage, with a flashlight working methodically through the debris with the focused patience of someone looking for something specific. Jack watched him work and was about to turn away when the agent stopped and crouched down and said loud enough to carry, Reyes, come look at this. What the fire had done in burning through the old plank flooring of the garage was expose the ground beneath. And in the ground beneath, buried in a waterproof box that Jack had never known was there, that had apparently been placed there at some point in the last year by someone who had access to his property when he wasn't watching, was a second cache of documents. A hard copy backup. More complete than the photocopies in the padded envelope with original signatures and original letterheads, and a handwritten ledger that would later be identified as Rhodes's personal accounting in his own hand. Jack stared at it. I didn't put that there. We know, Reyes said. Sarah Voss did. She told us she'd accessed your property twice without your knowledge. She said she chose you specifically because you were the least connected person she could think of. She said no one would think to look here because no one paid attention to you. She's not wrong, Jack said. She also said, Reyes continued, and something in her voice shifted just slightly, that you fixed her car on the highway in 1985 and never asked for anything, and that she'd been looking for someone like that ever since, and never found another one. She closed the evidence box. She said you were worth betting on. Jack didn't say anything to that. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't have been too much. By midnight, the crowd had thinned to neighbors and reporters and a collection of official vehicles whose flashing lights turned the whole property red and blue. Patricia Green from the Arizona Republic arrived at 10:30 with a recorder and a cameraman and the focused intensity of someone who had been chasing this story for longer than she'd admitted on the phone. She spoke to Jack for 20 minutes, then to Agent Reyes, then got on her phone and started talking to an editor in a voice that had gone from professional to urgent. Deputy Carver was identified in the crowd by Agent Reyes's partner at 11:15. Not arrested, not yet, but separated from the group and walked to a federal vehicle and asked to wait, and the expression on Carver's face when the agent's hand came down on his shoulder was the expression of a man whose long run of bad decisions had just reached its last mile. Sheriff Tate's name appeared in the documents. So did 2 county commissioners, a state licensing official, and a judge in Maricopa County, who had dismissed 3 separate complaints against Rhodes Construction over the previous 4 years. The FBI would later describe it as one of the more comprehensive networks of local corruption they had encountered in a case of this kind. But that night, standing in the wreckage of his garage, with smoke still in his lungs, Jack knew only that the sheriff's name was in there, and that the deputy who had told him to stay out of family business was sitting in a federal vehicle 20 yards away, and both of those things felt in their own quiet way like justice beginning to locate its feet. He went inside at midnight and found Lily asleep on the kitchen floor with her head on a folded dish towel and the stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. Hope was in the laundry basket, awake and calm, watching the ceiling with the profound attention of a baby who has decided the world is interesting. Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of milk. Jack hadn't poured him. The boy had helped himself, going through the pages of one of Jack's old automotive manuals with the focused absorption of someone who needed to think about something mechanical and neutral. Jack sat down across from him. Reyes says they'll arrange a call with your mom tomorrow morning, he said. Through secure channels. She said probably 9 o'clock. Ethan put his finger on the page to mark his place. Is Mom in trouble for going to them? No, she's a witness. They're protecting her. What happens after? That's a longer conversation. A lot of it depends on the legal process and how fast things move. Jack kept his voice steady and direct. He had decided somewhere in the course of this week that this boy deserved directness above everything else. There will be social services involvement. That's unavoidable. There are procedures, and some of them are going to feel slow and frustrating. But your mother is alive, and she's been cooperating with federal agents, and she wanted you safe, which means when this settles, the argument for you going back to her is a strong one. And until then, Jack looked at him. Where do we go until then? Ethan said. You stay here, Jack said. It came out more simply than he expected, without qualification, without the careful conditional language he had been preparing all evening. Just you stay here. Ethan looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked back at the manual. Okay, he said. The social workers arrived on the second morning after the fire. Two of them, a woman named Karen Solis and a younger man whose name Jack didn't retain, with clipboards and careful expressions, and the practiced neutrality of people who had learned not to assume. They asked to speak with the children separately. Jack said they could speak with all three of them together in the kitchen with him present. Karen Solis started to explain the procedure. Jack said he understood the procedure and that the children were not going to be put in separate rooms in an unfamiliar house with unfamiliar adults, and the way he said it left the conversation without a lot of room for negotiation. They sat in the kitchen. Karen Solis asked Ethan how he was doing. Ethan said he was fine and was currently learning to rebuild a carburetor. She asked Lily if she felt safe. Lily looked at her with those watchful eyes and said, Safer than anywhere since April. She asked about the baby. Jack put Hope in her arms to demonstrate the answer. The younger social worker leaned over to Karen Solis and said something quiet. She nodded and made a note. Mr. Mercer, she said, you're 46 years old, single, no dependents, no prior foster care experience. You understand that the county has a process for placement, and that process— I understand the process, Jack said. I'm asking you to look at those three children and tell me what the process is designed to protect. Karen Solis looked at Ethan, who was drinking his milk and watching the exchange with the expression of someone following a chess match. She looked at Lily, who had gotten up and gone to the counter to refill Hope's bottle without being asked, moving through Jack's kitchen with the easy familiarity of someone who had memorized where everything was. She looked at Hope, who was reaching toward Jack's coffee mug with both hands and making a sound of extreme personal offense at being prevented from grabbing it. She wrote something on her clipboard. We'll need to do a home assessment, she said. A background check, references. Doc Harmon has known me for 30 years, Jack said. Patricia Green at the Republic spent 2 days here and can speak to conditions, and you can ask the children. Karen Solis looked at Ethan. Is there anything you'd like to tell me about your time here? Ethan put down his glass. He thought about it for a moment with the seriousness he brought to everything. He came into a burning building to save the evidence, he said. And then he came back out when he heard me behind him because he wasn't going to leave without me. And he told me the truth about my mom instead of telling me a nicer story that wasn't as true. He paused. And he showed me how a carburetor works. Karen Solis wrote something else down. She was quiet for a moment. Mr. Mercer, she said, I'm going to be direct with you. Standard placement criteria make this complicated. The judge is going to have questions about long-term stability, about your capacity to manage 3 children, including an infant, about what happens to them when the mother's situation resolves legally. I'm not going to tell you it's simple. Nothing worth doing is simple, Jack said. She looked at him over her clipboard. Then she looked at the children again. Ethan, Lily, Hope, and whatever she was calculating behind her careful professional expression, resolved into something that was not quite a smile, but was in the same territory. I'll file a recommendation for emergency placement pending the full assessment, she said. That keeps them here while the process runs. It's the best I can do right now." It was enough. For now, it was enough. The call with Sarah came through at 9:17 the next morning, 17 minutes late, on a secure line that Agent Reyes set up through Doc Harmon's office. Jack drove the children there and waited in the hallway while they went in. He could hear through the door the sound of Ethan's voice carefully controlled the way it always was, and Lily's voice quieter, and then a silence, and then a sound from inside the room that he recognized as crying but couldn't tell whose. He stood in the hallway and looked at the ceiling and gave them their privacy. 20 minutes later, Ethan opened the door. His eyes were red, and his face was open in a way Jack had not seen before. Not the guarded watchfulness, not the weight of responsibility, but something younger and softer and bruised in the good way that things get bruised when they've been held tightly by someone who loves them. "She wants to talk to you," Ethan said. Jack went in. Lily was sitting in the chair by the phone with Hope on her lap, and both of them looked wrung out and clean in the way people look after they've cried until there's nothing left to cry. Jack picked up the receiver. "Mr. Mercer," the voice from the tape, clear and steady with something raw underneath it, now that hadn't been there in the prepared testimony. "I don't know how to say what I need to say to you." "You don't have to say it," Jack said. "I do. I sent my children to a stranger in the middle of the night because I was out of options and out of time, and you—" She stopped, composed herself. "Ethan told me about the fire, about what you carried out. The documents are what mattered. That's not what I meant." A pause. "He said you went back in when you thought he was still inside." Jack didn't answer. "He's 10 years old," Sarah said. "He is 10 years old and he has been carrying all of this since April, and I couldn't—" Her voice broke briefly and then steadied. "I need you to know that I'm going to do everything in my power to get back to them as fast as the legal process allows. I need you to know that." "I know," Jack said. "And in the meantime—" "In the meantime, they're here," Jack said. "They're safe. Ethan's learning mechanical work. Lily's been drawing every day. Hope is about to figure out crawling, and it's going to be a problem for everyone." He heard a sound on the other end of the line that took him a moment to identify as laughter, brief and wet and deeply relieved. "You raised good kids, Ms. Voss. You raised them careful and brave, and the little one has a grip like a mechanic." "Like a mechanic," Sarah repeated softly. "Yes, ma'am." There was a silence on the line that was not empty. It was full of everything that two strangers could say to each other across the distance between a borrowed phone in federal protection and a hallway outside a small-town doctor's office, when one of them had trusted the other with everything that mattered, and the other had not let it fall. "Thank you," Sarah said finally. It was simple and complete. "You picked the right door," Jack said. He handed the receiver back to Doc Harmon and went back out to the hallway where the children were waiting, and the four of them drove back to the house that now had a garage-shaped hole in its east side and smoke staining on the kitchen window and a laundry basket in the corner that had become something more than a laundry basket. Calvin Rhodes was arrested on a Thursday morning 6 days after the fire. Jack heard about it on the radio, a brief factual announcement about a federal arrest in connection with an investigation into worker disappearances along the Arizona-Mexico border. 3 other names were mentioned. Rhodes's name came last read in the same flat journalistic voice as the others, and Jack turned the radio off and went back to showing Ethan how to properly torque a bolt. 2 days later, Patricia Green's story ran on the front page of the Arizona Republic, above the fold, with a photograph of a burned garage and a headline that Jack read once and folded the paper and put it on the counter. He did not read it again. He knew what it said. He had been there. The town of Red Hollow had a way of looking at him now that was different from how it had looked before. Not hero worship, he would have hated that, but something more like recognition. The way people look at someone they have underestimated for years and have recently revised their opinion of. People waved at the end of his driveway. Pete Gruber from the feed store stopped by with a case of motor oil. Mrs. Henderson from 2 properties over brought a casserole so large it fed them for 3 days. Jack accepted all of it with the same quiet practicality he brought to everything, and he did not know quite what to do with the feeling underneath it, which was something close to belonging. The preliminary custody hearing was on a Friday afternoon. Jack drove to the courthouse in his truck with Ethan in the passenger seat, and Lily and Hope in the back, and he wore the cleanest shirt he owned, which was still not a very clean shirt, and he sat in a courtroom chair and answered a judge's questions in a voice that was steady and careful and completely honest. The judge was a woman named Castellano, and she had reviewing eyes, the kind that had seen enough people lying that they'd gotten very good at identifying when someone wasn't. She looked at Jack's background. She looked at the social worker's report. She looked at the fire marshal's report, which had already been entered into evidence by the federal case. She looked at Doc Harmon's letter and Patricia Green's written statement and a brief affidavit from Agent Reyes that described Jack Mercer as a man who had preserved critical federal evidence at considerable personal risk. Then she looked at the children. "I want to ask you something," she said to Ethan. She leaned forward slightly, not in the formal judge's posture, but in the way of someone actually asking. "You've been through a significant amount of disruption in the past months. Different houses, different adults, different situations. Given all of that, is there something you want me to understand about your current circumstances?" Ethan looked at the judge. He didn't look at Jack, didn't look at his sisters, didn't calculate the answer. The way Jack had seen him calculate harder things. He just said it in the same flat, direct voice he used for everything that was true. "He's the first adult who ever stayed." The courtroom was very quiet. Judge Castellano wrote something down. She set her pen on the desk. She looked at Jack with the careful, measuring look she'd been giving everyone, and then she looked at Ethan, and then she looked at Lily, who was holding Hope in the second row with the same practiced steadiness she brought to everything. And she kept writing. Judge Castellano's ruling came on a Monday. Emergency placement confirmed pending full assessment. The children would remain with Jack Mercer at the Red Hollow property. Review in 90 days. Jack read the letter twice standing at the mailbox, then folded it and put it in his shirt pocket, and went back inside where Ethan was eating cereal, and Lily was drawing at the kitchen table, and Hope was working very seriously on the problem of pulling herself upright against the leg of a chair. "Well," Ethan said. "You're staying," Jack said. Lily looked up from her drawing. She and Ethan exchanged one of their looks, the wordless language they'd been speaking their whole lives, and something passed between them that was too private to name. Then Lily went back to her drawing, and Ethan went back to his cereal, and Hope fell down on her bottom and immediately started pulling herself back up again, and the kitchen was filled with the sounds of ordinary morning, which was the loudest and most astonishing thing Jack Mercer had heard in 12 years. He stood in the doorway of his own kitchen and let himself feel it without trying to manage it. The first week after the ruling, Pete Gruber showed up with 4 men from town and a truck full of lumber. He knocked on the door, and when Jack answered it, Pete said without preamble, "We figured you'd want the garage back. We're not contractors, but between us we've built enough to know what we're doing." He looked at Jack steadily. "You going to make us stand on the porch?" Jack stepped back from the door. "Coffee's on," he said. They worked for 12 days. Jack and Ethan worked alongside them from the first morning, Ethan absorbing everything, handing tools before they were asked, for learning the names of things with the same focused hunger he brought to every mechanical problem. Jack watched the boy work and felt something in his chest that took him a while to identify because it had been so long since he'd felt it. Pride. Clean and uncomplicated as anything. Lily painted the inside of the new garage on the 3rd day. She didn't ask permission. She just appeared with a set of acrylic paints she'd found in the craft store on Main Street, which Jack later discovered she'd purchased with $4 of her own money. She'd been keeping in the stuffed rabbit's belly, and she painted along the east wall in the long afternoon while the men worked around her. She painted the desert the way she saw it, not postcard pretty, not harsh, but honest, full of color and heat and distance. When Pete Gruber saw it, he stood looking at it for a long time without saying anything, and then he said to Jack quietly, "That girl's got something." "I know it," Jack said. Hope took her first steps on a Thursday afternoon in the 4th week. She'd been threatening it for days, standing testing her weight, sitting back down with an expression of profound personal calculation. And then without announcement, she let go of the chair leg and took 3 quick steps across the kitchen floor toward Jack and sat down hard and looked at him with enormous satisfaction. Jack picked her up and held her over his head, and Hope grabbed his face with both hands and shrieked with delight, and somewhere in the middle of all of that, Jack laughed. A real laugh, full and unguarded, the kind that doesn't leave room for anything else. Ethan and Lily looked at each other, and then they started laughing too. And the four of them laughed together in the kitchen of a house that used to be the quietest place in Red Hollow until it wasn't anymore. It was the first time Jack had laughed without guilt in longer than he could calculate. The federal case against Calvin Rhodes moved faster than most federal cases move because the evidence was comprehensive and the witness willing to testify was credible and cooperative and had been preparing for this for 8 months. Jack read the updates in the paper and watched segments on the evening news, and every time Rhodes's face appeared on screen, composed expensive, not yet understanding what was coming for him, Jack felt the same cold satisfaction he felt when a repair held under pressure. Patricia Green's reporting won an award. She called to tell Jack, and he said that was good work, and she said, "You realize you're part of the story." And Jack said, "I know what I am and what I'm not." And she said, "Fair enough." And they hung up, and that was fine. The 90-day review passed. The social worker's report was favorable. Doc Harmon's letter was thorough. The judge's assessment was scheduled for a date 6 weeks out, and Jack's lawyer, a woman named Reyes from Tucson, who came highly recommended and was not related to Agent Reyes, but who had the same quality of getting things done without needing acknowledgement for it, told him the permanent placement was likely. Not certain, but likely. Good enough, Jack said. He'd operated on likely before. On the morning of the second month, Ethan asked him something over breakfast that Jack had been expecting and not expecting in equal measure. "Do you miss it?" the boy said. "Being alone." Jack thought about this honestly. "Some parts," he said. "I knew what each day was going to be. I knew where things were. Nothing surprised me. And now I don't know what's going to happen between breakfast and lunch." Jack looked at him. "I don't miss it the way I thought I would." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Sophie," he said. "That was your daughter's name." Jack went still. "I found a picture," Ethan said quickly. "On the bookshelf. I wasn't going through your stuff I was dusting. Lily asked me to help dust, and I picked it up to move it, and I looked at it. She had your eyes." "She did," Jack said. "I'm sorry I looked." "It's all right." Jack set down his coffee mug. He looked at the table surface for a moment at a scratch in the wood that he'd been meaning to sand out for 3 years. Her name was Sophie. She was 4 when she died. She liked pancakes, and she hated being put to bed, and she had an opinion about everything even at 4. He paused. "She would have had a lot to say about you 3. Ethan was watching him with the careful attention he brought to things that mattered. "What do you think she would have said?" Jack considered it. He'd spent 12 years not allowing himself to imagine Sophie at 5, at 10, at 15, not allowing the hypotheticals because the hypotheticals were the cruelest part. But sitting here now in a kitchen that was loud and crowded and impossibly alive, he let himself imagine it just briefly, just enough to answer honestly. "I think she would have arm wrestled you on day 1, he said. "And I think she would have adopted Lily like a sister inside of a week. And I think she would have carried Hope around constantly and called it babysitting, but really it would have just been because she wanted to." Ethan smiled. It was a quiet smile, not performed, the kind that doesn't need an audience. "She sounds good." "She was the best thing I ever knew," Jack said. "Before." The word sat between them. Before. They both understood what it meant and what it did not mean, and neither of them needed to explain it. Sarah Voss arrived on a Saturday in the 3rd month. Jack had known she was coming. Agent Reyes had called the day before to say Sarah's protective custody arrangement was transitioning, that she was cleared to travel, that she wanted to see her children, and would be driving up from Phoenix with a federal escort. He told the children that morning over breakfast. Lily put her fork down and was quiet for a long time. Ethan said, "Today." And when Jack said yes, Ethan got up and went to the garage, and Jack heard the sound of tools being picked up and set down and picked up again, which was what Ethan did when he was feeling something he didn't have words for yet. She arrived at 2 in the afternoon. She was thinner than her voice on the tape had suggested, and she had the careful eyes of someone who had spent months watching everything around her for threat. And she stood at the edge of the driveway for a moment when she got out of the car. Just a moment. And Jack saw her take in the new garage, the wildflowers that Lily had planted in the ash ground at its base, the baseball glove on the porch railing, the faded sunflowers Lily had painted along the front window frame. Then Lily came through the front door at a dead run. Sarah caught her and went down to her knees on the gravel and held on, and Lily made a sound that Jack had never heard from her. Not the screaming of nightmares, not the careful measuring of her words, but something animal and young and enormously relieved. The sound of a child who has held herself together past the breaking point and has finally found the person she was holding together for. Ethan came out of the garage. He walked, not ran, but he walked fast, and when Sarah reached out her arm and pulled him in, he went without resistance, all the composed watchfulness gone in an instant, just a 10-year-old boy who wanted his mother. Jack stayed on the porch and gave them the driveway. He went inside and put the kettle on and found he needed to do something with his hands, so he cleaned the stove, which didn't need cleaning, and then he looked out the window and watched the three of them in the driveway and felt cleanly, and without complication, glad. Just glad. It was a simple feeling, and he had forgotten how simple it could be. Sarah came inside 20 minutes later. The children stayed in the yard, Ethan showing her the new garage, Lily pulling her toward the wildflower patch, Hope riding on her mother's hip, with both fists in Sarah's hair. Jack poured 2 cups of tea and set them on the kitchen table, and Sarah sat down across from him. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the kitchen the way you look at a place that has been described to you many times and that you are seeing in person for the first time. "The table," she said. "Ethan said you eat here every meal together. All 4 of you." "Most meals," Jack said. "He said you made pancakes the first night, at midnight." They hadn't eaten. Sarah wrapped both hands around her mug. "Mr. Mercer?" "Jack." "Jack." She looked at him directly. She had the same eyes as her voice on the tape, clear and steady, with something underneath them that had been through a great deal and had not been broken by it. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to understand that there's no right answer and no pressure behind it. It's just a question." "All right. When this resolves legally with the courts with custody, Ethan and Lily and Hope come back to me. That's the plan, and it's what I want, and it's what they want." She paused. "But Ethan told me something yesterday on the phone. He told me he's learned more in 3 months here than in the 2 years before it. He told me Lily hasn't had a nightmare in 6 weeks. He told me Hope says a word now, not mama, not yet, but a word." She stopped. "He said she says Jack." Jack looked at his tea. "What I'm asking," Sarah said carefully, "is whether you would consider staying in their lives. Not as a placement, not as a state arrangement, just as the person you've become to them." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not in a position to offer you anything except the honest truth, which is that my kids have a good man in their corner for the first time in a long time, and I'm not foolish enough to want to take that away from them." Jack was quiet for a long moment. "Ms. Voss," he said. "Sarah." He looked up. "I buried my wife and daughter 12 years ago, and I spent every day since then making myself smaller so there'd be less of me to lose. And then, your children knocked on my door in a thunderstorm, and I couldn't make myself small enough to send them away." He paused. "I'm not going anywhere. That's not a negotiation. That's just what's true." Sarah looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded once, the nod of someone receiving information they had hoped for, but not assumed. "Good," she said. Outside, Ethan's voice rose in protest about something, and Lily's laughter cut across it, and Hope made a sound of supreme personal authority about whatever was happening, and the afternoon light came through the kitchen window and settled on the table between 2 cups of tea, and Jack Mercer sat in the chair he'd been sitting in every morning of his adult life, and felt the fullness of the thing he was sitting in the middle of without flinching from it for the first time. The garage reopened on a Tuesday in August. Jack hung the sign himself with Ethan beside him on the ladder, holding the other end, making sure it was level. Lily had painted it white background clean letters, a small hand-painted hope flower in the corner. It said, Hope and Sons Garage, established 1997. Ethan looked at the sign for a long time. Sons, he said. Plural. That's what it says, Jack said. Ethan didn't say anything else. He climbed down from the ladder and walked into the garage and picked up a wrench and started on the carburetor he'd been rebuilding for a week, and Jack understood that was his answer, and it was enough. It was more than enough. That evening, the four of them sat on the porch after supper. Ethan had his baseball glove working oil into the leather the way Jack had shown him. Lily had her sketch pad. Hope had learned to walk the length of the porch and back without falling, and she was doing it with the extreme concentration of someone who has recently discovered a new skill and intends to practice it to death. The desert air had cooled to something bearable, and the cicadas were going in the scrub brush, and somewhere down the road, a dog was barking at something it probably didn't understand. Jack put his hand in his shirt pocket and found the note. He'd been carrying it since the night of the storm, moved it from pocket to pocket without thinking about it, the way you carry something that has become part of the weight you're used to. He unfolded it on his knee. Please protect them all. Someone is looking for us. He looked at it for the long moment. Then he looked up at the three of them on the porch with him. Ethan focused and purposeful. Lily absorbed and alive in the way she was only when she was creating something. Hope marching back and forth across the weathered boards with all the gravity of someone on a very important mission. He didn't say anything out loud. What he thought was too simple for words, too direct for any kind of performance. It was just this that a woman he barely remembered on a highway in 1985 had noticed, that he was the kind of man who helped without being asked and left without wanting anything in return. And she had held on to that observation for 12 years, and when the worst happened, she had aimed her children at him like an arrow at the only target she trusted, and he had caught them. Not because he was brave, not because he was exceptional, because he had opened his door in a thunderstorm, the way he always opened his door, the way his father had taught him. A door should be opened fully without conditions, without calculating what it was going to cost. He folded the note and put it back in his pocket. Ethan looked over at him. You okay? Yeah, Jack said. You're quiet. I'm always quiet. You're a different kind of quiet than usual. Jack looked at him. At this boy with old eyes and grease on his hands and a baseball glove in his lap, this boy who had carried 3 children through months of darkness and handed them to a stranger and trusted against all evidence that the stranger would hold on. I'm fine, Jack said. Better than fine. Hope completed another lap of the porch and arrived at Jack's chair and grabbed his knee with both hands to steady herself. She looked up at him with the enormous eyes she'd had since the first night, eyes that had seen too much and were still somehow unclouded. She opened her mouth and said it clearly, the way she always said it, like a statement of simple and permanent fact. Jack. Right here, he said. She patted his knee twice with great satisfaction and turned around and headed back the other direction, and the evening air moved soft and warm across the porch, and the cicadas kept their rhythm in the dark, and Red Hollow, Arizona, settled into its summer night the way it always had. But the house at the edge of the highway had a light on now, and voices in it, and a sign above the new garage that meant what it said. Jack Mercer had spent 12 years making himself a man with nothing left to lose. It turned out that was never what he was. It turned out he was just a man who hadn't yet met the people worth holding on to. And when they knocked on his door in a thunderstorm with a note and a newborn and 4 words that cut through 12 years of silence like light through a crack, he had been exactly ready without knowing it for the rest of his life to begin.
Over a decade ago. If you continue ceramics, you can have mixed media of textiles and I know, isn't that cool? I came across someone who has developed a formula that they mix this clay with fibers. I don't know entirely what their mixed ratio is, but they're able to weave it like into crochet pieces, And then they put it in the kiln and they're able to have a clay artwork. Wow. Ceramic piece, made out of clay and fiber arts. But yeah, which I thought was really cool. I saw that the other day. I think it came on my feed, for Insta. Fiber clay. Yeah. Something like that. And it was so cool to see. Absolutely loved it. We have a bunch of clay here, that I'm going to be working with, when I have some of my time off. And so that'll be fun. But yeah, if anyone is not following Danny, please do yourself a favor and follow Danny. Amazing musician, absolutely kills it with music, and also is an awesome fork knife pew pew. My gosh, words are hard, y'all. But thank you so much for the hype train. Love your faces. Y'all are amazing. Thank you for the biddies and the belated birthday wishes. I appreciate it. But yeah, thank you so much. Let's see here. That's a lot of biddies. Over 1,600 biddies. Y'all are awesome. I appreciate it. But yeah, so we're currently working on this. We also have been working on what has been dubbed the nipple shirt. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar. But Cleansy's community has dubbed this the nipple shirt. It's called the Pulled Partition by James and Watts. It's a beautiful pattern. I absolutely adore it. And you'll see why it's called the nipple top. If you go to exclamation point pattern, you'll be able to see what we're talking about. Also, I need to put the pattern for this pin at the top. But yeah, so this is that top. I think I dubbed it that